Howdy. How are we doing, everybody? Is everyone enjoying summer so far? We're just kind of at the start of it. It's already like oppressively hot here. I'm liking how this seat is like overgrowing as I film here. I don't know if it's that noticeable to you guys, but it is to me. I'm hoping that by the end of this channel, I'll just be enclosed in a sarcophagus of trees, and then that'll just be my demise. I didn't sleep basically like at all last night, not by choice. So low energy, but I think I decided it's time to just ramble into a camera for a little bit. So I'll try to make this concise and make sense in editing. Butter honey pig bread. I said that I was going to talk about it more in a video, and I am fulfilling my promises. It was longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize, a literary award in Canada, in 2020. I learned about this one from the same video by the Poptimist that I learned about small game hunting at the local Coward Gun Club. Both Canadian books, both won awards within the last year or so, both touch on similar themes. I think there will be comparisons to be made by the end of this video. They might be rambly. Stick around or don't if you don't feel like it. Ultimately, I want you to be happy. It's been 40 seconds and this is already a wreck. Butter Honey Pig Bread by Francesca Ekwuyasi. It's a Canadian book. It is one of my favorite books I have read in recent memory. The plot summary you'd get on the back of the book is kind of as follows. We follow a Nigerian family. There is Kambira Nachi, the mother of two twin daughters, Taye and Kahinde. The father of these two twins passed away kind of in their childhood. There are other traumas that the book does get into, but instances in this family's life that has led to their estrangement. The book is kind of a frame narrative. So we start with kind of a family reunion after like a decade with this mother and her two twin daughters, and they're interacting and it's a little bit stilted and awkward. And from there it kind of gets into their past as to why they are estranged as such. It follows the perspectives of all three women in this story, Kambira Nachi, the mother, as well as Taye and Kahinde. It'll just cycle through, so it'll go, cycle through. What I mean to say is that there's never two chapters in a row that are narrated by the same woman. All the stories are equally interesting, so you're never like, oh man, we're back to Kambira Nachi's story. They're all intriguing because they're all such unique and dynamic characters. One thing that adds some interesting context to, well, first of all, the death of their father, as well as the trauma in their past, is that Kambira Nachi believes she's an Ogbanje. It's basically like an African spirit that possesses the body of a young girl and then passes away in the childhood of this child to cause distress to the family. Now, what Kambira Nachi believes is that instead of passing away in her childhood, she has rejected this and decided to keep on living because she is enjoying life, and she decides to keep living for her family. In her own mind, she believes that this rejection of her spiritual role is going to lead to further distress for her family. So, when it gets into her past, she chooses life, she has kids, and she's overjoyed, but she's also nervous at what's to come because she feels she will be directly responsible for trauma in her kids' lives, and that's kind of her perspective. She feels at fault for it. I said this before in the past, and I'll say it again. I think it's really interesting that the book never really confirms or denies that. Taye and Kahinde both make remarks that their mother's not well. So, from their perspective, they just believe that she's mentally unwell. The book really never says anything either way about it objectively. I think there are some interesting discussions to be had about the nature of lived experience or subjective experience. I mean, to Kambira Nachi's perspective, everything she experiences in her life is because of her existence as an Ogbanje, and that's what works for her and informs her worldview. Outsiders, such as their daughters, don't see it that way. Who's to say, I suppose. What are some other things I liked about the book? Well, okay, if I want to keep talking about it, I'm going to start getting into spoilers, so I guess here's your warning for anyone. If you haven't read the book, please go read it. It's great. So after this trauma in the two daughters' childhood, there's definitely a noticeable rift in the family. you know, they were raised as two twin sisters that loved each other very dearly, and they have a very tight bond, and they still do in some ways, but it's kind of separated pretty noticeably after what happens, which I will get to, but I want to talk about something else first. As the two daughters get into young adulthood, they kind of separate, go their separate ways, and move to different cities, and it talks about their experience of growing up, you know, as late teens, like 18 to like mid-20s, which is a very formative part of people's lives, right? You're experiencing adult life for the first time, and you get a good sense of who they both become separately because they have no communication during those years. What I liked about Taye's story is she's kind of discovering who she wants to be, or maybe just who she is. She does a lot of partying, experimenting with drugs. She's exploring her sexuality. She's exploring kind of her values as well. What she thinks is important. She's getting a lot of tattoos. She's having the kind of stereotypical, I don't know, young adult phase, I suppose. I like that a lot of the people she bonds with during this time, they have very different lifestyles and perspectives and worldviews, and they're all just presented as such with no commentary necessarily either way. She'll interact with a group of friends in which there are, you know, people of different sexualities and gender expressions. It's just like, I'm so-and-so, this is my jam, and it's like, okay, cool. And it's just accepted without really commented on. Sexuality and gender expression is not like the main point of the novel, but it's just nice that there's that representation just kind of without any commentary. It's just a part of the story, and these are who these people are. And Taye kind of finds a very welcoming second family through this group of friends, which is cool. That section of the novel kind of leads into a plot point about one of her friends who is gay and as a result is ostracized from his very Christian family. So that is a separate plot point, but up to that point, you know, she just bonds with this guy because he's just a great guy irrespective of, you know, his sexuality. So there's another character in the novel who it comes up organically that they are non-monogamous, and it's just like, okay, I do like more representation and diversity in books, but I'm also generally pretty like aware of when it's obvious that someone felt they had to put it in, and this does not feel like that at all. A lot of what I appreciate about this book is that everything's just kind of presented as such. You know, I touched on Kambira Nachi, what she believes, it's just kind of presented the way it is, and then people's different identities are presented, and that's how they are. There's a lot of references to different cultures. People speak in different languages or different kind of dialects of English even, and it doesn't translate for you. They just speak that way, and the other characters understand. And it's just like, okay, like if you don't understand the language they're speaking, you're welcome to go look it up. But it's just presented because it's kind of just like a window into these people's lives. I'm the kind of person that I'm not at all bothered if someone speaks in a different language in a book and I don't know what they're talking about. I'd rather not know than get the translation. I don't know. It's just like, okay, if you want to know, either know the language or put the work in to go put it into a translator. I don't know that I can come up with a really like coherent reason as to why, but yeah, like I said, it's just like presenting these people's lives instead of being a narrative that is handcrafted for me as someone who doesn't know any language but English. Taye becomes a phenomenal cook, and she cooks a lot of traditionally, I guess, Nigerian dishes. There's a lot of ingredients that it doesn't state explicitly what they are, so if you want to gain insight into what she's making, you kind of have to do a little bit of your own research, and it's well worth it. Holy smokes, the food in this book is just like amazing. I may have said maybe very briefly in other videos that I love descriptions of food and drink in books. If I haven't said that, I love descriptions of food and drink in books. It's really easy for me to just like put peanut butter on a piece of white bread and then crush that while I'm watching The Office, and that's my meal for the day. It's not healthy. And I don't know, just seeing characters put care into their cooking and then being right there with them and experiencing all the sensations that go along with it, and it gets your mouth watering and it makes you want to, I don't know, just appreciate something that's such a simple pleasure in life. There's something really just pleasant about it. It's just very cozy. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about the unexplained trauma in their past. This is a mega spoiler, so yeah, seriously go read this book and then we can talk about it more. Kehinde at like age, I think it's like 8 to 10, is sexually assaulted by an uncle repeatedly. It's brutal. It is miserable. And the main thrust of the rift that happens in this family afterwards is kind of just not processing what happened to Kehinde together. Kehinde never really talks to her mother about whether she was aware, and she wasn't. She had no idea, but there's maybe a little bit of animosity there. Kambira Nachi, her mother, never appropriately apologizes and discusses with her daughter what that assault means to her and how it informs the rest of her life. Taye was the same age when her sister was being assaulted, and she was aware of it. So Kehinde subsequently kind of blames her for not saying anything to her mom, because it goes on for like days and days. But Taye is of course guilty about that, but at the same time, she almost like wasn't able to process what was going on because she was like 8. And so it's a very complicated situation with multiple perspectives, 2 of which were from little girls who were not fully developed and maybe can't process trauma like that. It's basically this horrible, horrible thing that happened to Kehinde, and the family never worked through it together. So that's why they go their separate ways, and they all kind of find other ways to cope with the rest of life. So that's why Taye goes and discovers herself through her sexuality and partying and different jobs and learning about cooking. Kehinde goes her own way and kind of learns how to trust again and how to love somebody. It talks about her romantic relationships after. One thing that I do really like about this book is that ultimately it's got it's kind of a hopeful perspective on the fact that life sometimes or even often has trauma, and people are able to get through that and find a life worth living again. I'm going to talk very briefly again about small game hunting at the local Coward Gun Club. That's another book that deals with misogyny and sexism and sexual assault in a very brutal way. And the tone of that book throughout is very bleak and depressing, and it concludes kind of just saying this is a serious problem that has not been resolved in modern society. It just hasn't. And it leaves you feeling just miserable. That's an important story to tell. I'm not knocking that. Kehinde is sexually assaulted by her uncle, who is a miserable, putrid man. Horrible, horrible human being. But she learns to love eventually. And by the end of the book, her husband, who she has a child with, is a really beautiful example of a man who is not toxic, basically. Now, am I complimenting the fact that there's positive representations of men in this book gets dangerously close to being like, well, not all men are like this, but that's not really my point at all. My point is more that I think it's a really valuable perspective to recognize that life is sometimes horrible and sometimes people are miserable, but life can get beautiful again and you can meet beautiful people as well. I think that's a really nice, optimistic, and realistic in some ways perspective to take. In some way, that's ultimately what this book is about, is not letting traumas of our past define our life. Even with the other characters, the gay character I was talking about that's a friend of Taye's, he goes through some serious trauma as a result of his ostracization from his family and his extended family because of his homosexuality. But he moves on and he finds family in his friends. He kind of learns to move on and appreciate the life he has, despite the fact that it has been miserable for him at points as well. It's just a really moving book. There's a lot of misery in it, but it's also quite uplifting. I think I'm pretty much done talking about this book. I want to talk about the ending really quickly. When I first wrapped it up, I was kind of frustrated by it because it kind of just peters out. But the more I think about it, I think that's the point, and I kind of appreciate it. Kind of towards the emotional climax of the book, Kambira Nachi and her 2 daughters say out in the open, okay, Kehinde, this is what happened to you. We obviously didn't talk about it. Let's flip and talk about it. And there's a lot of expression of how that lack of communication hurt all 3 of these women. And by the end of the book, it kind of states like Taye and her sister are not as close as they were when they were age 6, but they are working on it. So you don't see, oh, they are great sisters again. There's still that animosity there, and there's still like that building on that relationship again and learning how to be sisters again, because I guess that's like the realistic thing. They haven't talked for like a decade. They finally have this kind of rap session about this horrible thing that happened. They wouldn't mend things necessarily. It certainly seems to have helped, but they're just kind of moving forward, and talking about what happened is the first stepping stone of that. All of this climax, as well as kind of the falling action, is that what it's called? The end of the book all ends very quickly. It wraps up. So that's why I kind of felt like that's it. But you kind of see the beginning of their working towards the rest of their lives. So it is ultimately kind of a hopeful note, and a fairly realistic one, because again, life isn't necessarily always like that. Relationships take time to be strengthened in the context of new information. I think that's kind of all I want to say about it. I really enjoyed it. I can think of like 3 different like nitpicks. Like the things I didn't like about this book aren't necessarily things that are worth your time, because I thought they were just kind of petty. I'll give an example, I suppose, so you have an idea. Throughout the book and throughout, the decade or so after Tai and Kehinde had not spoken to each other, Tai writes a ton of letters to Kehinde that she doesn't ever send. So she's got letters and letters that the book does read out, where she's writing to her sister without actually sending them. So it's just kind of acts as a journal about how much she misses her sister. She's writing to Kehinde, and then she says, "Oh, that's mom downstairs yelling for me. I have to go," which to me is something you would say to someone over the phone, maybe through a text. I wouldn't write out, "Oh, that's mom down there, I have to go," because that would just take too long. It wasn't realistic to me, is my point. But I explained that to a friend, and he's like, "No, I think I would do that." So, who am I? Instead of talking about what I didn't like, I would love to hear what you people thought of it. Please go read it if you haven't, although I'm disappointed that you watched this video and spoil it for yourself. Oh, you dang dirty dogs. Tell me what you thought of this book. And if you didn't like it, I'm curious to see why, because maybe there's similar criticisms there. That's all I got. Thank you very much for watching, people. I hope you have good days. I hope you're doing well. I do have more videos on the way, hopefully where I am less overtired and cranky about it, but that's what I got for you today. So thank you very much. As always, everybody, take care.